everybody, this is Sean Speaks. I just want to talk a few minutes about freedom to think, right? We always say freedom of speech, freedom of speech. Our forefathers, went through so much just to have the freedom, to speak. But I want to talk about freedom to think. Why is freedom to think important? Freedom to think is more important to me, actually, than freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is a right given to you by another person or persons. It's a fellow man's right given to one another by an organization, a group, or a country that allows social and legal expressions to each other's within a border. Now let's take America, for example. America is a country, a type of organization or group. It has what's called a constitution, which is its governing document that governs what happens within the border. Amendments can be added to the Constitution to give greater expression of shared rights and obligations of the people within the group. One of the amendments to the Constitution, to the United States Constitution, one of the first amendments was the First Amendment. Now, the First Amendment says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and petition a government for redress or grievances. So that's basically the First Amendment. Now, the Constitution itself was written in 1787 and was put into operation in 1789. But the First Amendment did not happen until 1791. Okay? And then there was a host of other amendments in that same year, such as freedom to bear arms, search and seizures without warrants, those types of things. Those were all added in like 1791. But the Constitution itself was in effect in 1789 without those amendments. So you had a constitution that did not give you the freedom to speak or the freedom to assemble and have religion or whatever you want to have it. You didn't have that. The founding organizers understood that having an organization of people that have a perception that they can't express themselves or express criticism of the powers to be would cause the country that they were building to be no more than the monarchy that they had left. And they knew that eventually people would rebel against them, just like they had rebelled against the crown over in Europe. So the founding organizers of America understood that the people, needed a designated right to speak their thoughts, even if it's in complaints of the governing body. But the governing body in America really isn't people. It's a system that is fueled by the thoughts and minds of people. When the Constitution was first written in 1787 and put in operation in 1789, and the First Amendment was put in operation in 1791, the Negro or the Black person were not considered free people and were not included within these initial amendments or amendment rights. Black people or the Negro race were property, but the value of us as property was different than a horse or a buggy. So what they did with us is that they used our value as part of what's called a 3/5 compromise, so that the states or the colonies that had a lot of Negro slaves in them could use the value to get sort of numerical representation in government. So the government in 1787 thought enough about us as Black people to use our bodies for representation, but not our minds. Let me repeat that. The government in 1787, when they created the Constitution, thought enough about us, Black people, to use our bodies for representation, but not our minds. So what was called the Three-Fifths Compromise was originally in the Constitution. Now, this is important, not just to understand, but I need for you to overstand and understand this. Not from an emotional, get pissed off and stuck in an emotional state about the Three-Fifths Compromise, right? Because that's really a trap. But I really want you to understand, and overstand, and marvel at their thinking when putting the constitutional document together. Do you understand the mental wealth strategy this small group of people had to have had in the creation of this document? They had to have had a North Star perspective. They had to have had a North Star perspective of how they wanted this country to be at the expense of the Negro body. Think about that. They had to think about that. They had to think about us and say, hey, they're not really human. They really don't get a say. We will treat them only to the extent as humans for purposes of states that have a lot of them in their borders will get representation based upon the Three-Fifths Compromise. However you choose to identify, whether you're Black person, Negro race, an Israelite who thought they were a Gentile, the people they stole from Africa, the Niji people of Turtle Island, whatever the title you want to go by, right? When the founding organizers established this Constitution, we were basically excluded except as to be used as property and to be used in the counting of what they needed for governmental representation and taxation. Our bodies were used, but our minds ignored. Our bodies were used, but our minds ignored. I'm going to tie this in so you can kind of understand where I'm coming from with regards to why the freedom to think is important. In 1789, a Black person was not included as a human with respectable thinking rights. The respectable thinking rights in America was limited to a few humans who organized the country. Remember, it was only a few who got together in secret and organized this country. An important point to remember is that the only people who had a right to take their thoughts and express them into governing words were the organizers of the country who decided to take the colonies, rebel against the crown, and form the United States of America. This means that not even other Europeans that were in the land, that were brought here on boats and living here, had a right to actually express their opinions as an American until the 1791 amendments to the Constitution. When the First Amendment was done, it gave basically rights to the other Europeans that had come into America so that they could speak their mind. But Black people were not given that right to express their thoughts, not even in 1791, because the Three-Fifths Compromise didn't get abolished until the 14th Amendment in 1868. Okay? In 1868. Now, this will conclude part 1 of Freedom to Think, and I will put together and release part 2 of Freedom to Think. But I really want you to let that marinate, right? This difference between freedom to think and freedom of speech. And we'll talk later. Thank you.